given that by the Sri Vaishnava Acharya, who were active from the 11th to 14th centuries in their independent theological treatises in Sanskrit and Maniprawalam. So the main topic of the theological treatises, which are usually in prose but sometimes in verse, is self-surrender Saranagati. One of the soteriological doctrines of the Sri Vaishnavas. In simplified and concise terms, the doctrine of self-surrender highlights the hierarchical relationship between God and those devoted to Him, whose essential natures are subservient to God or His Chesha in this world and also in the afterlife or moksha. So given their subordination, the devotees can attain liberation or moksha by themselves and have to surrender their agency and possession to God in order to be liberated from the transmigration of suffering or samsara, which is caused by this cycle of karma. So liberation or moksha, which is the result of self-surrender, equals the state in which one performs eternal service or nitya kainkarya to God in His divine abode, according to the Sri Vaishnavas. But what exactly is the process of Saranagati, and is Saranagati mental, physical, or verbal, or all of these? And how does it relate to God, Vishnu Narayana, who has the autonomy in granting one liberation? So, and how long does one have to wait to attain the result or the phala, which is moksha, and who is eligible or has a tikara to undertake self-surrender? So in the treatises I will investigate today, the Sri Vaishnava Acharyas deal with all these issues of Saranagati. So during the early period from the 10th century onward, the Sri Vaishnavas composed texts in Sanskrit mainly, and the generations after them incorporated Tamil and Maniprawalam as the means of textual composition. Then, not too long after, during the medieval period, from the 12th to the 14th century, we witnessed the production of immense multilingual corpus that encompasses all three languages, meaning Sanskrit, Tamil, and Maniprawalam, and different genres, ranging from the theological treatises, ritual manuals, commentaries, hagiography, poems, stotras, and so on. So a good number of these seek to justify the doctrine of Saranagati and the dual scriptural traditions, or Upaya Vedanta. My first book, Surrender to God Across Languages, builds upon various studies at the intersection between the Sri Vaishnava multilingual corpus and Saranagati during this medieval period, and let me discuss some of the most important ones here. So this book shares some of its literature with Vasudha Narayanan's dissertation. To elaborate the first part of this dissertation, which was later published under the title The Way and the Goal, Expressions of Devotion in the Early Sri Vaishnava Community, deals with the literature from the early period up to the beginning of the medieval period, which is also the focus of my research. And the second part of the dissertation, which explores some of the texts I include in this book, is unfortunately still not publicly available. But in its entirety, the dissertation comprehensively traces the development of self-surrender from the early to the medieval period and provides valuable insights on the study of this doctrine. However, it does not systematically chart the relationships between the linguistic changes and doctrinal movements, and that's actually what I attempt to focus in my first book. So my study is also indebted to Srilata Raman's Self-Surrender Prapatti to God in Sri Vaishnavism, published in 2007. So especially her focus on the classification of the literature related to Saranagati or Prapatti literature, that's what she called. According to Srilata Raman, among the various kinds of Sri Vaishnava literature, there are those, and I quote, whose main aim is to present a situation in which prapatti takes place or to define and discuss it, unquote. End quote. So the two primary groups of Prapati literature are the Sanskrit praise poems or the stotra of Ramanuja's disciple Kuresha Parashara Bhattar and the Manipravalam commentaries on the Tiravaimoli or the Bhagavad Vishayam. So investigating self-surrender, Raman focuses on the latter group, but my study does not take up either the stotra or the Bhagavad Vishayam for various reasons. First, these groups of texts tend to present the perspectives on only one side of the community, meaning mostly the Tamil side, since they were produced by a single lineage of the Sri Vaishnava Acharya at Srirangam. So the independent treatises I have collected in my study, however, were composed by the authors who were from different lines and were active both in Kanchipuram and Srirangam. This collection thus allows us to compare and contrast the two intellectual communities, especially their positions on Saranagati. Second, the stotras and Bhagavad Vishayam are already well studied compared to the materials I investigate in this book. Third, it is also more common for authors to be polemic and straightforward in independent treatises, unlike in stotras, in which they tend to state the same arguments in poetic and less assertive manners, and in commentary, in which their claims are often made in the shadow of the original texts. So this is not to say that the independent treatises I'm studying are superior to the other texts. It is simply that the treatises have different style, and one that is more systematic and more explicit, which makes it easier for us to chart their treatments of Saranagati in the composition. So the independent treatises were first composed around the 12th century, following the Sanskrit corpus of Ramanuja and Yamuna, and also the poetic and commentarial texts I have mentioned. Their authors, Vatsya Varanakuru, Naradur Amar, Perivajan Pillai, Mekhanadari Suri, Pillai Lokacharya, and Vedanta Deshika were key figures in the history of the Sri Vaishnavas that I'm focusing on. As previously stated, so they were from different lineages and lived in Srirangam and Kanchipuram during the 12th to the 14th century. Scholars usually describe the distinction between Kanchipuram and Srirangam in terms of their linguistic and scriptural preferences. Kanchipuram, which is further north than Srirangam, was identified with the center of Sanskrit scriptural traditions and the intellectual activities, while Srirangam was associated with the Tamil tradition and the Tiravaimoli and the Manipravalam textual commentarial tradition. So the most influential treatment of this distinction is that of Patricia Mummy, who separates the medieval Sri Vaishnava intellectual community into the Kanchi Acharyas and the Srirangam Acharyas. So based on this classification, the first group was much more Sanskrit and Vedanta oriented, and they were active in the doctrinal and philosophical debates with rival communities. In contrast, the community at Srirangam addressed only the Sri Vaishnavas and prioritized the Tamil corpus of the Alvars, and also the Itihasas, Mahabharata, Ramayana, the Puranas over Vedantic scriptural sources. On the surface, one may say that the same division can be used to explain the corpus under study in my project. Our first group of authors, consisting of Vasya Varadakuru and Mekhanadari Suri, were active in Kanchipuram and wrote in Sanskrit only. The second group, Perivajan Pillai and Pillai Lokacharya, were more engaged with the Tamil tradition in Srirangam and mainly used Manipravalam in their writing. The last author, Vedanta Deshika or Venkatanatha, presents an exception. He was a leading figure in both locations, Srirangam and Kanchipuram, and composed texts in both Sanskrit, Manipravalam, and even one Prakrit, Maharashtri. However, as I will demonstrate, in addition to the distinction between the two communities, the authors had distinctive arguments and agendas even when they inhabited the same location. So my study is both diachronic and synchronic. So with the intention to reveal the complex multilingual history of self-surrender, Saranagati, The 4 chapters of my book that follow feature two trans-temporal narratives at the same time. One on the linguistic mediums, and the other on Saranagati, to show the relationship between the two. And more specifically, my chapters chart the 4 linked turning points of the true Vaishnava linguistic and intellectual milieu in chronological order, beginning with the formation of the intellectual communities by Ramanuja in Sanskrit, and then in Manipravalam by all the acharyas. And the systematization of self-surrender by the 2 communities, the separation between them, and the harmonization by Vedanta Deshika. The diachronic account presented in these chapters further demonstrates both the continuity and divergence in some cases among the acharyas. Through their writings, those from one generation provided the linguistic and intellectual conditions for the next generation, especially within the same circle. And despite these conditions, we will see that the authors negotiated the constraints and possibilities within and even across the distinctive communities in ways that were not only responsive to their predecessors and contemporaries, but also innovative. Within each chapter, I compare 2 contemporary texts, one in Sanskrit and the other in Manipravalam, to demonstrate how each agent chose to defend self-surrender differently when operating within certain linguistic parameters, leading to distinction and even times some debates between the different systems of Saranagati. An exception to this is the first chapter, which provides the necessary background for the other chapters, and importantly, in the course of developing their own doctrinal system, the authors, these acharyas, uniquely shape the means of communication they engage with all the different aspects. And these interlinguistic dynamics and intellectual activities constantly impact one another in such a way that we cannot really fully understand one without the other. So I'll just outline different chapters and also kind of summarize the overview of what we're going to see briefly. So in the first chapter, I trace the formation of these linguistic and doctrinal domains around the 11th to the 12th century. This chapter lays out the prehistory of the Sanskrit and Manipravalam treatises that are the focus of the rest of the book, and reveal that the three Vaishnava acharyas had innovative choices in constructing their Sanskrit and Manipravalam corpus. And then chapter 2 makes evident how the differences between the Sanskrit and Manipravalam corpuses that emerged from in the earlier period influenced the systematizations of Saranagati by Vasyavarada and Perivajan Pillai, who inhabited different locations around the 12th and the 13th century. So these two acharyas, I think, were the first to explicitly incorporate the traditions and arguments handed down in the previous Sanskrit and Manipravalam literature, and we're talking now about all the mantras, Ramayana, Mahabharata, and also all the Vedantic scriptures, the Upanishads, and so on. So my argument for this chapter is that Vasyavarada Kuru composed his work on Saranagati, the Prapanna Parijata, in Sanskrit to communicate with other authors who should be in the same intellectual circle in Sanskrit in Kanchipuram. But Perivajan Pillai used Manipravalam in his Parantarhasyam to participate in the community at Srirangam, in which Manipravalam was the main linguistic medium of that time. Despite the linguistic conditions of the previous generations, the two acharyas both invented new genre of literature in their own linguistic domain to provide platforms specifically for defining and discussing Saranagati. Their systems of self-surrender, which were tied to the linguistic boundaries of the two locations that are quite distinct, but at the same time have mutual influence. In the third chapter of my book, I focus on Mekhanadari Suri and Pillai Lokacharya, who lived in the two distinct locations of, again, Kanchipuram and Sri Rangam around the 13th century. These 13th century acharyas were evidently influenced by Vatsyavarada Kuru and Perivajan Pillai. Mekhanadari Suri referred to the similar sets of scripture, Upanishad, the Vedas, the Puranas, and arguments mentioned by Vatsyavarada Kuru, also Panjaratra Samhita, of course. And he wrote his Sanskrit Mumukshu Paya Sangraha. On the other hand, Pillai Lokacharya's Maniprawala Mumukshupadi contains many discussions found in Perivajan Pillai's Parantarahasya. However, instead of simply solidifying the respective domains and system of self-surrender, these two acharyas adopted shared different endeavor. So each of them intended, and here is my understanding and my argument of this chapter, that each of them intended to draw further distinctions between one system of self-Saranagati and the other by narrowing the scope of scripture they wanted to use. Unlike the previous acharyas, who operated in either Sri Rangam or Kanchipuram mostly, Vedanta Deshika or Venkatanatha was the first to decide to work in both domains. Among the acharyas investigated, the case of Vedanta Deshika, which I deal with in chapter 4, is an exemplar of how the acharya can choose to work within or across different domains of languages and also intellectual circles. Vedanta Deshika's also own institutional roles and discrepancies from the previous time that had accumulated by this point might also have motivated Vedanta Deshika to resolve any inconsistencies, and hence he's known as the one who attempted to harmonize all the different strands of the tradition. So let me get to now the content, and also let us start with Ramanuja. So Ramanuja was the leader, institutional leader of the Sri Vaishnava community, succeeding Nathamuni and Yamuna, according to the community's account. And also all three of them were Brahmins, and while Ramanuja's intellectual project built up on the works of his predecessors, he successfully established a distinct, branch of Vedanta, Vishishtadvaita Vedanta. And at its core, this system essentially proclaims the Aikya, the oneness of the Supreme Being or Brahman, who is then qualified or Vishishta by Jit and Ajit, so the sentient and non-sentient beings that are actually apritak or separate from God, which is presented at Vishnu Narayana. Importantly, Brahman is personified, as I said, Vishnu Narayana, and I think this is also one of the main difference between Vishishtad Advaita and Advaita that came before. Ramanuja's establishment of this new Vedanta system involved also challenging other systems, in particular the pre-existing Advaita Vedanta of Shankara. To promote Vishishtadvaita Vedanta, Ramanuja engaged in philosophical and hermeneutic interpretations of the Upanishads, the Brahma Sutra, the Bhagavad Gita, which serves as the foundation of Prasthana Trayi. He interpreted the Brahma Sutra in his Sri Bhashya and explained the essence of the Upanishads in his Vedartha Sangraha, and provided a commentary on the Bhagavad Gita in his Gita Bhashya. In addition to these texts, the authoritative corpus of Vedanta includes the Smriti scriptures, namely Itihasas, Ramayana, Mahabharata, and also Puranas, especially Vishnu Purana in case of Ramanuja. So Ramanuja wrote these texts in Sanskrit, and the language used by presumably his intellectual circle at that time. And in these works, Ramanuja expressed his also some of his oppositions to the other strands of Vedanta and also Bheda-Vadin. One of his focus is also to establish bhakti, this doctrine of devotion. And more specifically, I think in my understanding, he intends to use bhakti as a tool for the Sri Vaishnava to distinguish itself from the previous traditions and also to establish Vishishta Advaita. Ramanuja was also attributed and celebrated by the community as one of the first organizers of the temple administration due to his advocation of the more accessible Pancharatric ritual to replace the Vedic one, and his introduction of Shudra participants in temple administration. So the doctrine of devotion or bhakti is vital to Ramanuja's establishment of Vishishta Dvaita Vedanta, as I've said earlier. And in his works, Ramanuja defines bhakti by highlighting several key characteristics, including one is distinction from Advaita Vedanta doctrine of liberating knowledge or jnana. Second, it's Vedantic status. Third, the fact that bhakti needs to be performed is a karya, like a mimamsaka ritual. And four, that it has restricted eligibility, meaning it is actually not for Shudras. And five is use of Saranagati as its anga or its auxiliary. So to defend this doctrine as the Vedantic means for his tradition, he incorporates various scriptural sources, both from Shruti and Smriti. He also invokes the authority of the Vedic hermeneutic or ritual system of Mimamsa. In the Sri Bhashya, which is his longest work, Ramanuja divides his lengthy commentary on Brahma Sutra 111 into two sections, the Lakhu Siddhanta and the Mahasiddhanta. Each of them can be further divided into two subsections. As I said, there's the Siddhanta part and there's also the Purvapaksha. It should be noted that in the Sanskrit scholastic practice, authors also typically begin by presenting the Purvapaksha and then followed by the Siddhanta. I'm sure this is not new information. So the two, let me skip this part. And then Ramanuja ultimately proclaims that the doctrine jnana that's supposed to give one or lead one to liberation or moksha is synonymous with knowledge Vedana of God in the ultimate form of Brahman, and also dhyana or meditation, upasana, meditative worship, and finally this same doctrine can be called bhakti. In other words, all of these terms, Vedana, Dhyana, Upasana, Bhakti, all refer to this doctrine of devotion. Ramanuja further defines this soteriological knowledge as a form of meditation, which, and I quote, has the form of the continuous stream of remembrance of God like a stream of oil. So in his term, Dhyanam jatai Tailadharavat avichinna smriti santana rupam. This is his own definition of bhakti. And he then describes this remembrance as having a similar form of perception or pratyaksha, meaning that it is phenomenologically as vivid as perception. And another way to define this knowledge is worship, that is to be repeated, also again like meditation. And in Ramanuja's word, it is precisely that knowledge in the form of worship that is to be repeated more than once that is described as the constant remembrance. Let me try to give you the Sanskrit. So he's saying, Tasyaiva Vedanasyopassana rupasya asagrit avritasya dhruvanusmrititvam upavarnitam. And this is also his definition of bhakti. Then after Ramanuja, Vatsya Varadakuru or Nadadur Ammal and Perivatan Pillai were the first to put forward the arguments and the scriptures saying that Saranagati could be the alternative of bhakti. And they did so in their Sanskrit and Maniprawalam treatises. This is also the moment when Saranagati was systematized as, again, the main self-surrender by other acharyas in their Sanskrit and Maniprawalam literature. So Vasyavarada Kuru was a disciple of Vishnu Chitta, who succeeded Tirukurakai Pillan, the first commentator of Nama verse, Tiruvaimoli, and also a follower of Ramanuja. Despite his association with the original commentator of the Tamil scripture, Vasyavarada Kuru did not write anything in Maniprawalam or Tamil, nor did he acknowledge Tiruvaimoli in his work. He was mostly active in Kanchipuram and highly respected by his disciples, who also composed texts exclusively in Sanskrit, like Atreya, Ramanuja, and Sudarshana Suri. Among the authors in his circle during the same time, Vasyavarada Kuru put in the most effort to propose that Saranagati is on par with Bhakti. However, he focused on Saranagati only in one work, Prapanna Parijata, while dedicating his other works, namely the Prameyamala, Tattvasara, and Tattvanirnaya, to the investigation of Vedantic philosophical system as established by Ramanuja. So these three works feature Bhakti as the central doctrine. On the other hand, in this Prapanna Parijata, Saranagati is the main focus. So, considering Vasyavarada Kuru's corpus and the Sanskrit works of other authors around this time, it is possible that Saranagati was considered as something still pretty internal to the community. And in other words, Ramanuja's establishment of Bhakti as the core doctrine of Vishishta Advaita Vedanta led to a strong connection then of this doctrine and the Vedantic and the external Vedantic intellectual discussions in Sanskrit. That is to say, it is my understanding that when Ramanuja talks about Bhakti, he's actually intended the external audience, like the Advaita and other traditions. But Saranagati, either around the time of Ramanuja or after, is actually an internal discussion, meaning among the three Vaishnavas. As okay. Thank you. And let me just maybe show you the conclusion of his Prapanna Parijata. So in the conclusion, Vasyavarada Kuru imagines a community of good people who undertake Saranagati as the intended audience of this work. As the title suggests, Vasyavarada Kuru indicates that this composition is meant to grant all the needs for those people who desire, like the wish-giving tree or parijata. And also, according to Vasudha Narayanan, this tree is a representation of God who grants the goal, that is moksha, to those who surrender to him. So I'll just read out his ending, and we have a very nice analogy here that we might want to talk about later. So a great bridge across the milky ocean of practices of those who have surrendered is assembled with the pieces of the mountains of Vedanta, Smriti, important and true statements of the sages and the Samhitas. Those who desire to quickly attain the far shore of the ocean that is liberation by this path surely will be liberated due to being free from previous and later sinful actions. The ship of offering, Nyasa. So here he's calling Saranagati or Nyasa as the ship that will actually take you across the ocean of samsara. So this ship has the bottom board, which is held together and fixed by karpanya, and is loaded with pins of Vishvasa, faith, and can be controlled by pulling the rope of request, Prarthana. and has offering the Nikshepa as the good ore. Since this ship carries embodied beings, the Bandha, across the ocean of samsara, fearless people who get on it will be rescued immediately and without any defects. The composition titled the Prapanna Parijata is known in the world as that in which all the needs are produced for good people all around. So based on these passages, in particular the last one, we can see that Saranagati is presented as the doctrine for the whole community, and it is revealed by various Sanskrit scriptures, including Shruti, Smriti, and the statements of the sages, and also Pancharatra Samhitas. Vatsya Kuru defines Saranagati as the act of nyasa, or offering, which is then accompanied by other assisting elements like Anukulya Sankalpa, Pratikulya Varchana, Mahavishvasa, Karpanya, and requesting God as the protector. So more importantly, Vasya Kuru likens this Saranagati to a ship that will carry those across the ocean of samsara. So these concluding verses show that show two things. First, the validity of Saranagati as the means to liberation, and second, the definition of Saranagati. So unlike Vatsya Kuru, Periyavajan Pillai was involved in the commentarial project that celebrated the Tiruvaimoli at the Tamil Veda, or the Tamil scripture equal to the Sanskrit one. Not only did he deal with Namavar's most important work, but he also known as the commentator, as he commented on all of the Alvar's poems. One could say that Periyavajan Pillai's extensive commentarial project may have been influenced also by his predecessors like Nanjiar, the second commentator of the Tiruvaimoli and the teacher of Periyavajan Pillai's own teacher, Nam Pillai. Periyavajan Pillai himself defended the validity of Tamil by reiterating Nanjiar's justification of the Tamil scripture and language at the beginning of his Manipravalam commentary. And also, interestingly, Periyavajan Pillai reused Nanjiar's argument verbatim, claiming that Tamil is the language suitable for theological expression and is easier to understand for Sanskrit for those in the community and the area. So the community in Srirangam where Periyavajan Pillai lived was known as the main site for producing Manipravalam commentary and discussions on self-surrender by his time. While Vatsya Guru composed only Sanskrit works, Periyavajan Pillai used only Manipravalam. And as Patricia Mami argues, Manipravalam became, I quote, a major vehicle for the expression of Sri Vaishnava doctrine, end quote, and not just a tool for commenting on the Alvar's Tamil corpus, and especially the Tiruvaimoli by this time. Let me just skip to... Well, so in addition to being immersed in the world of Manipravalam commentaries, Periyavajan Pillai can be regarded as the forerunner of various and new genre of the Sri Vaishnava literature. So to elaborate, he introduced Manipravalam commentary on the devotional Sanskrit works of Yamuna and Ramanja, such as the Gadyatraya. Most importantly, he set up a new platform, the Rahasya Kranthas, to specifically systematize self-surrender based on both the Sanskrit and Tamil tradition. As the name suggests, so these Rahasya Kranthas center on the Rahasyas, or the three mantras of the Sri Vaishnava, the Tirumantra, Davaya, and Charamashloka. I believe that it is through Periyavajan Pillai's Rahasya Kranta that these secrets became prominent in Manipravalam discussions. And with this, I do not mean that the Sanskrit authors actually ignore the three rahasyas. It's just simply that they didn't comment explicitly on these three, like Periyavajan Pillai. So in comparison to Vasya Kuru's system of self-surrender, in the Prapanna Parijata, Perivajan Pillai's discussion in the Parantarahasiyam is more expansive. Nevertheless, this difference might be partly due to the distinction in the styles of composition, because Prapanna Parijata was actually composed in verse form and Parantarahasiya is actually in prose. We can see in his text that Perivajan Pillai emphasized the importance of God. In another context also, emphasized the importance of God, and he described how one should not only be submissive to God, but also to other Sri Vaishnavas. Perivajan Pillai discusses the meaning of the letter U in Pranava, which is the Pranava that is the first syllable of the Tirumantra. In this context, he proposes that this letter U expresses one's subservience or sheshatva to God alone. Specifically, one is also dependent on God and has Him only as the protector, the Goptru. To totally devote oneself to God, Perivajan Pillai also suggests that one must be subservient to other Sri Vaishnavas. What is striking here is Perivajan Pillai's explicit reference to and his definition of Sri Vaishnavas as those whom God desires. Perivajan Pillai then refers to Bhagavad Gita 7:18, which states that the one with knowledge is my very self, the Chyanin. And this is, he pointed this out as the source of his idea. He further describes the Sri Vaishnavas as the Sharira, the body of God, in the same context before providing more explanation of one's subservience. So here is his logic. Since the Sri Vaishnavas are completely dependent on God by definition and by nature, it is not considered wrong to seek support from other Sri Vaishnavas. In other words, recognizing and accepting one's Cheshatva to other Sri Vaishnava does not go against one's Cheshatva to God. In Perivajan Pillai's words, even if one submits oneself to other Sri Vaishnavas, there is no damage to the exclusive subservience to God. It is analogous to a faithful woman who performs her duties to the body of her husband. There is nothing wrong in this case. Perivajan Pillai's definition of the community here is very insightful when compared with that of Vatsyavarada Kuru. In the introduction section of the Prapanna Parijata, Vatsyavarada Kuru mentions the community as those who follow Saranagati. But unlike Vatsyavarada Kuru's preference, which obviously places the emphasis on Saranagati, Perivajan Pillai's classification of the Sri Vaishnavas does not include Saranagati, instead focusing on God and one's subservience to God. Then by the 13th century, after Vatsyavarada Kuru and Perivajan Pillai, Saranagati was widely accepted as the primary doctrine to this upaya to moksha. We also witnessed the differentiation a bit between the Sanskrit and Manipravalam circles around this time. So I will focus now on Mekhanadari Suri and Pillai Lokacharya together, and each author came from one of the two sub-communities. Mekhanadari Suri, supposed to be from Kanchipuram, and Pillai Lokacharya was actually active in the circle of Sri Rangam. According to the Sri Vaishnava account, Pillai Lokacharya was the son of Vadaggu Turuvidi Pillai, and also the brother of Manavala Perumal Nayanar, the author of Acharya Hridayam. And Pillai Lokacharya is portrayed as Vedanta Deshika's contemporary and also one of his influencer. Following Perivajan Pillai, who was a generation earlier, Pillai Lokacharya composed 18 Manipravara Rahasya Granthas, of which the Sri Vachana Pushanam, the Mumukshupadi, and the Tattvatraya are the most highly regarded. Considering the content of his works, it is clear that Pillai Lokacharya was influenced by Perivajan Pillai's Mangiprawalam works, especially the Baranda Rahasyam. In particular, Pillai Lokacharya's Mumukshupadi, which is the focus of my investigation, can be considered a summary of Perivajan Pillai's Baranda Rahasyam. Like Perivajan Pillai, Pillai Lokacharya structured his Mumukshupadi based on the three secrets, dedicating one section each to the Tirumantra, the Davaya, and the Jaramashloka. As its title indicates, the Mumukshupadi is meant to elucidate the means, the padi, or the way, for those who desire liberation, meaning the Mumukshu. And this knowledge can be obtained, according to Pillai Lokacharya, through the three secrets or the rahasyas. However, Pillai Lokacharya deviated from Perivajan Pillai in terms of the compositional style. Instead of long and connected prose, Pillai Lokacharya adopted what can be called the sutra style, which is brief and sometimes can be also obscure. In developing his system of Saranagati, Pillai Lokacharya resorted to the Alvar's Tamil poems and rarely used the Sanskrit sources that were used by his predecessors. In addition to the Tamil corpus, Pillai Lokacharya regarded the Rahasyas and the Itihasas as foundational for his soteriology of Saranagati. His incorporation of these traditions indicates that he was influenced by Perivajan Pillai and was involved in the same Mangiprawalam circle at Srirangam. Mekhanadari Suri, on the other hand, was one of the main advocates of Ramanuja's Vishishtadvaita Vedanta. He wrote many texts, I think, but not so many existed after his time. And one of such Vedantic treatises is the Nayadhyumani. But what I will focus on is actually his Mumukshupaya Sangraha, which focuses on Saranagati. At the beginning of the Mumukshupaya Sangraha, Mekhanadari Suri delineates two groups of people who are eligible for Vedic study. And the first group consists of those who are born among the three Varnas or the Dvija, while the second group comprises those who are born from the proper hierarchical marriage. He then asserts that only people from these two groups can perform rituals as prescribed by the Vedas after their studies. They then come to the realization that the result of the Vedic rituals are fleeting, and due to this realization, they would study the Upanishads, which are the scriptural continuation of the Veda or the Uttara Mimamsa. Through this Upanishadic study, they attain the knowledge of God. They also gain the correct understanding that moksha, which is the same as serving God in Vaikuntha, is ultimate and lasting. They then have both correct knowledge, samyakyanam, and capabilities, martya, to pursue the means, this upaya, which include devotion, bhakti, and sharanagati, along with their angas. By restricting eligibility for devotion and self-surrender to these two groups, Mekhanadari Suri indicates that those who are not from the same background cannot follow either means. He also clarifies in the cited passages why this is the case. One must start with Vedic study in order to undertake bhakti or sharanagati. Without this Vedic knowledge, it is impossible for one to perform either bhakti or sharanagati. And there is no way left for those who are not from these two groups, such as Shudras and women, to attain liberation. So just to note, the position of Mekhanadari Suri is very remarkable and striking because he's basically the only Sri Vaishnava acharyas who said that Sharanagati is not for Shudras and women, while others, the other Sri Vaishnava acharyas that I investigated from the time of Ramanuja to Vedanta Deshika said that no, you can do Sharanagati. Sharanagati is for those who cannot do Bhakti, and Bhakti is for the Dvija. So, I mean, this is the only one in history that I can find so far. Unlike Mekanatari Suri, Pillai Lokacharia operates in the Maniprawalam circle, in which God's supremacy and compassion, his kripa, are prioritized over self-surrender or Saranagati. Pillai Lokacharia centers his system of Saranagati on the binary opposition between Bhakti and Saranagati, and also the identification of God with Saranagati. And it should be noted that these are not new move, because Perivajan Pillai also did the same in his Parantarahasya. But here in Pillai Lokacharya's text, we see it in the more extreme and elaborate manners. So Pillai Lokacharya highlights God control over the process of getting liberation, and insisting that everything is dependent on God. And Saranagati is nothing other than one's acceptance of God's decision to liberate himself, oneself. Given this, he declares that Saranagati cannot be considered an upaya, or a means that should be performed by an eligible person, the adhikari, for the pursuit of moksha. Pillai Lokacharya made this argument when interpreting the Dharma Shloka by distinguishing between God, who is the Siddhopaya, the means that is already there, and the Satyopaya, meaning the means that need to be accomplished by the Adhikari, and that includes Sharanagati and Bhakti. So here, as I said, this was already there in the time of Perivajan Pillai, but Pillai Lokacharya made it more explicit that there are only two means, Siddhopaya and Satyopaya. And if you want to follow Siddhopaya, that's all you do. You don't have to do anything else, because that's God. And God can just give you grace, and that's it. That's all you need for liberation. On the other hand, you have the Satyopaya, which is Bhakti and Sharanagati. And he's actually recommending going for the Siddhopaya, because you don't have to do anything extra at that point. So you're just waiting for God's grace. Unlike the previous authors, and I'm actually reaching my final acharya, unlike the previous acharyas who composed treatises on self-surrender in either Sanskrit or Manipravalam alone, Vedanta Deshika wrote two texts, main texts on Charanagati, the Sanskrit Racha and the Rahasyatrasaram in Manipravalam. And not only did Vedanta Deshika hoped to defend Charanagati, but he also attempted to harmonize any inconsistencies within the texts of the previous acharyas. And the institutional and intellectual context in which Deshika worked might actually influence or motivate this harmonizing project. So, looking at Vedanta Deshika's entire corpus, Satyavrata Singh suggests that Vedanta Deshika might have composed some of his bigger works, like the Rahasyatrasaram and his Sanskrit commentaries on the works of Yamuna and Ramanuja, like the Gadyatraya, during the last period of his life in Srirangam, with the hope to revitalizing the community after the attack. On the other hand, the Niksheparaksha was likely composed during the earlier period of his life, when he was still in Kanchipuram. Let me skip this part and get to our main point. So compared to the Niksheparaksha, the Rahasyatrasaram is substantially larger in size, as you all surely will know. It has 32 chapters, and Vedanta Deshika presents basically a compendium of Sharanagati with this work. Let me get to the right part. So the Sri Vaishnava community today believes that the Rahasyatrasaram is supposed to be Vedanta Deshika's last work. And that's why it's the culmination of his system, his thoughts, his idea, his philosophy, and everything. Vedanta Deshika incorporates a variety of Sanskrit, Manipravalam, and Tamil sources in the Rahasyatrasaram. And here in this text, we find some Sanskrit scripture, the Upanishads, Puranas, Pantaratra Samhitas, again the Rahasyas, the three Rahasyas. And overall, I would say that Vedanta Deshika pays most attention to the three Rahasyas since he devoted many big chapters interpreting these three. And also within his interpretation of the Rahasyas, he inserted the system of Saranagati, which is quite similar to the one we saw given by Perivajan Pillai and Pillai Lokacharya. However, the interesting point is that in his Racha, his system of self-surrender is actually quite close to the one we see in Vatsyavarada Guru's Prapanna Parijaka. So my understanding is that Vedanta Deshika decided to write two texts, one in Sanskrit, one in Manipravalam on Saranagati, same topic. And my question is why? Why do you need two texts in two different languages to comment on the same topic? And what I realized after investigating these two texts side by side is that in Sanskrit, Vedanta Deshika was attempting to play the Vedantic game and the Sanskrit and talking to the Sanskrit circle like Vatsyavarada Guru. On the other hand, with his Rahasya Tirasaram, he actually, he did something different because he was now part of the Manipravalam circle. And with his Rahasya Tirasaram written in Manipravalam, he could actually elaborate all his system of Saranagati, incorporating all the ideas and scriptures from his previous, from the previous acharyas, including Perivajan Pillai and Pillai Lokacharya. One also remarkable point is that in his Racha, Vedanta Deshika never mentions the Tiruvai. Everything he cited were actually in Sanskrit, and they are all Vedantic, like Bhagavad Gita, Puranas, Upanishad. There are of course Mantaratra Samhitas, but never the Tiruvai. We see something different in the Rahasya Tirasaram because that's where he could actually harmonize all the aspects and bring everything together, including the Tiruvai. So I think with his, and I'm now concluding my talk, so with his Rahasya Tirasaram, this Manipravalam treatise on self-surrender, Saranagati, Vedanta Deshika attempted to harmonize multiple systems of Saranagati proposed by the previous acharyas and also invent some new strategies to accommodate and balance the roles of Saranagati, Bhakti and God. So for the final point, if you're interested, buy my book when it's out. It's not out yet, but I'll let you know. Thank you.
Pranam to Sadhguru, Pranam to Swamiji. Dr. Manasicha's talk kept to the Adhara Shruti of Sri Pitam, which is Saranagati. We have followed it from the mouth of Sadhguru herself and those who did not have the opportunity to listen to her. Swamiji has provided us several occasions by means of various little books, Upadeshams, and also special talks to those, a few who are willing aspirants and those who are keen on evolving. The Tatparyam of Saranagati. One of the things that struck me listening to her, I must say that I wrote to her 2 years ago when she was a PhD scholar. I was asked by Professor Clooney to contact her to review our book which Swamiji published on Vedanta Deshika called Hayagrivam Upasmahe. And Professor Clooney at Harvard suggested that she could be a very good reviewer of such an erudite book which consists of so many scholars from India. And for some reason it didn't happen.
Sorry, I moved my university, so I didn't get that email.
Okay.
Sorry, my apologies.
No apology. On the other hand, we are destined to meet here, which is the locus of Saranagati. It doesn't matter that it did not happen in the USA, but it happens here. As somebody who comes from an academic background, I must say, with Swamiji's permission, your commitment to the linguistic basis of philosophy as well as experience, and your commitment to the scholarly tradition and the scholastic way of presenting it, which should not alienate the ordinary people, the Janaranjaga way of saying things. In the beginning, it was very tough, and I was astounded to know that she had studied both Pali and Sanskrit, and she was impeccable in the way she talked about every one of the acharyas. I am a Sri Vaishnava. I cannot say that I deserve to be called a Sri Vaishnava because we know next to nothing. But it was a great education to listen to her because we understand the whole gamut of the evolution of not an exclusive philosophy of Saranagati, but an inclusive philosophy of Saranagati. We also understand how it may start with as a conflict between Kanchipuram, the northern town, and the southern town of Srirangam, as a linguistic conflict between Sanskrit and Tamil, and at the end of it, you see, what just puts you together is the experience which puts you on the boat, because she used the idea that it is an upaya to take you to cross, and the idea for the image of a boat is very important in all cultures. Samsara, which is full of, it may not have dinosaurs, but it may have other kinds of monsters to engulf us. But Saranagati is the kind of boat, and how the acharyas have expressed the nuances of that. That is what she presented. I am afraid, madam, I did not understand the entirety of the nuances, but you spoke about how the acharyas were sticking to certain principles, and yet they managed to just present a way out of the tunnel, or at the end of the tunnel there is light. There is darkness, and Saranagati, because I remember in one of the Corona times conferences, I asked her, there was something about Bhakti which Swamiji organized. I asked that lady, she was from Mumbai, what is Prapatti? Her answer was a little disappointing me. I don't know her at all, Swamiji. She said, oh, Prapatti, it's just one of the terms which Vaishnava, one of the concepts Vaishnava used, which I thought was very different from the way I understood it as someone who has been coming to Sri Sadguru from the days of my early post-PhD times. In between I was not coming, but nevertheless, you see, the idea was there. So Prapatti is not something, one of the terms which you just find in the lexicon of, what shall I say, philosophical terms or religious terms. It is something of an experiential boat which helps you to cross. That is why Saranagati you understand, Prapatti you may not understand. And another thing that troubled me when I was working on Ramanuja was, who is qualified? Adhikaratvam. And the Dr. Parsadi Irkar, I have no business to talk in front of Dr. Parsadi, who is taking so many, arranging for so many classes, but this is a problem that you face. Whether Ramanuja altered only what shall I say, the social fabric, or did he alter the philosophy? Professor M.A. Venkatakrishnan, who was my illustrious colleague in Madras University, he just made a very strong point in all his lectures that Ramanuja altered the very philosophy rather than merely just changing the terminology. And so the question is, who is eligible to not only worship, but to receive the grace and also seek the grace? And that is why the question of Adhikaratvam till today. And there she pointed out two schools, those who said that only those who were eligible to read the Vedas and scriptures, they could just be eligible, or they are allowed, but others are not allowed. But there is also another school in Vaishnavism which tells you everybody is allowed. One of the greatest things about Ramanuja is that the way he ran the mutt was, in his mutt all kinds of people were there, and he highly regarded women, and women were great scholars. Even the Guru Parampara does not record all those things very properly. The role of some of the women who contributed to the making of the great commentarial tradition, you see, the hermeneutical tradition was very, very great. And one great incident is when Ramanuja is going to Tirukkolur. So, am I right? He is going to a place, and a lady comes out of that place, Tirukkolur Ammal. Am I right? And Ramanuja says, everybody goes to this place in order to understand the experience, but why are you coming out of that? Why are you going away from that? And the answers that she gives, The answers are there in most of the books, whole series of references to all. One day I want to write about it after understanding everything. But I understood certain things, that she was so impeccably knowledgeable. And she knew the entire tradition. At the same time, she had the great humility of a Sri Vaishnava. And therefore, I must say that it tells you something about the whole range. It does not mean that when we talk about scholasticism, we give up experience. How to combine experience and scholasticism is what I learned from Dr. Manasicha's talk today. Your name is Akepiyapornchai. Am I right? Sorry for that wrong pronunciation, but you were very meticulous in the way you pronounced every Acharya's name and every text name. Thank you so much. And I think we have to invite the Consul General Sri Racha Aribarg to say a few words. Or you have said something about her, but I thought you would say something to the audience. Thank you so much, madam.
Thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak briefly. So in fact, I have talked about her contributions to the academic world by her research at Cornell, and it will be published by, I think, I know it will be published by a leading publishing company in the United States. What is the name of the publishing house?
It is the Roche Foundation.
By the Roche Foundation. So her work does not belong, and it will not be the prime for Thailand, but I think it will be a contribution to the global scholarship too. And also thanks the foundation, the Sri Vishnu Mohan Foundation, for providing her an opportunity to deliver this lecture, and she said that she will come again to do a research in Chennai. And I also would like to praise the activities and the Swamiji for helping people to, in terms of getting knowledge especially in the interfaith issues and the medical camps, that the Consulate will be very happy to work with the foundations in the future. But thank you for giving me this unique opportunity, Venerable. Thank you.
On Hinduism and Ramanuja, and she incorporated, amalgamated so many areas which I really admired, along with the Thai Consul General. It is truly amazing one. I am expecting your book, to be out soon, so that a book can give us a great idea about your PhD, and also about the Hinduism, which is one of the most popular religion in the world. India has a big role to play. I always believe if India fails, Asia dies. That is the power of India. The culture, the civilization, the heritage, the history. You look at India's glorious history. In fact, everyone should know about the history of this great country, the Dharma Bhumi, the Karma Bhumi. That is the power of India. The wonder that was India, the grandeur that was India, the splendor that was India. That is all India is all about. I'm so happy about the foundation. And I will get the Buddhist monks from Myanmar to Chennai very soon, and I will organize such meetings in foundation to know about how Buddhism spreads world peace. Today, Buddhism plays a very key role. Buddha is the light of Asia. And when I say Buddha is the light of Asia, we must know about the importance of Buddha and about the principles of Buddha and how Buddhism promotes world peace and in Asia. So I will bring the Buddhist monks from ASEAN countries. I have been in touch with all the ASEAN countries, 10 countries. I will bring the Buddhist monks to our foundation, so that they will give us a broad spectrum, that they will give us the panorama, right, of Indian heritage and Buddhism. With these few words, I thank Swamiji for giving this opportunity, and I'm always available for the foundation to assist, right, in any time and wherever possible. Thank you so much, Swamiji.